The busy clinic on the edge of the spaceport smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. People moved slowly through narrow corridors, their faces tired and worn from long travel or harder lives. Among them, a man shuffled forward, his clothes torn and dirty, his hair long and tangled. No one noticed him much. He carried nothing, asked for nothing, and tried to stay invisible. The humans around him were too busy with their own problems to see a stranger in rags. Inside the small medical room, a young technician adjusted a scanner that had been acting strangely for weeks. It was old, patched together with spare parts, and often gave false readings. Today, however, it seemed determined to do something different. The homeless man sat on the cold metal chair, his hands folded in his lap. He watched the blinking lights of the scanner, expecting pain or discomfort, but nothing happened. He had been through worse. The technician pressed a few buttons and the scanner hummed, spinning softly. Numbers and symbols scrolled across the screen faster than the human eye could follow. Then the device froze. A sharp alarm beeped, echoing through the small room. The technician jumped back in surprise. The screen displayed a single, repeated line in bold letters. Royal DNA detected. Impossible, the technician whispered. There must be a glitch. The throne has been empty for 1,000 years. No human could carry royal DNA now. She looked at the homeless man who did not move. He did not speak. He simply tilted his head and stared at the scanner, as if he could understand the words themselves. Other staff members rushed into the room, drawn by the alarm. They crowded around the scanner, scanning the man's face and his body with their own devices. Each machine confirmed the same result. His blood carried the mark of the ancient human rulers. Whispers filled the room. It can't be real. The royal line is extinct. He's just a beggar. How? The man shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention. He had always lived quietly, helping where he could, avoiding trouble and staying out of the notice of powerful people. Now the eyes of the galaxy seemed to be upon him. He wanted to stand and leave, but something in the room held him in place. Not fear exactly, but curiosity. The head archivist arrived last, a tall figure in simple robes, but with an aura of authority. She stared at the screen and then at the man. We thought the throne had been empty for a millennium, she said. Her voice was calm but tinged with disbelief. We thought all records of the royal bloodline were lost. Yet here you are. The homeless man blinked. He had never heard of the throne in detail. Stories existed, yes, but they were old, almost forgotten. He had grown up in the lower districts, learning survival, not history. Royalty was something distant, like a story about the stars. He had never considered himself part of it. Staff argued quietly among themselves, debating what to do. Some suggested testing him further. Others wanted to inform the government immediately. The man listened without responding. He could feel the weight of many pairs of eyes on him. He had learned long ago to ignore stares, to move unnoticed, but this was different. It was not curiosity alone. This was recognition. The technician approached again, her hands trembling slightly. Do you know who you are? She asked softly. The man shook his head. He did not. He had a name, but it was meaningless here. It was not important in the streets where he lived. Yet now, for the first time, he realized that something within him was remembered, even if he did not remember it himself. No one in the room fully understood the implications. 1,000 years of history had passed since the throne had been abandoned. Humanity had spread among the stars, leaving old kingdoms behind. The royal line was thought to be gone, a relic of a past era. And yet here, in a forgotten clinic at the edge of the galaxy, that line had quietly survived in a man who had nothing, who wanted nothing, and who had never sought power. The man rose slowly from the chair, feeling the eyes follow his every movement. He was not proud nor arrogant. He was simply aware. 1,000 years of history had converged in this moment, but he felt only the quiet pulse of life within him, steady and calm. He took a step toward the door, intending to leave before anyone could force him to do otherwise. The archivist moved to block the exit. Wait, she said gently. You need to understand. This is important. You are not just any human. You carry something the galaxy has not seen for 1,000 years. The man stopped. He did not speak, but his eyes met hers. There was a question there, simple and direct. Why me? The room fell silent, except for the low hum of the scanner and the distant sounds of the spaceport outside. Everyone waited, not for an answer, but for the man's choice. He had lived a life without notice, without expectation, and now history itself seemed to lean toward him, demanding recognition. He did not move immediately. He only looked around, quietly observing the humans who had stared at him in shock and wonder. Something stirred within him, a sense of possibility but also responsibility. The scanner had revealed a truth he did not seek. Now he had to decide what it meant. And for the first time, the galaxy knew that someone long forgotten had returned, not with fanfare or power, but with the quiet presence of a man who had survived, unseen, for years, and who might yet shape the future in ways no one had imagined. The homeless man walked through the crowded spaceport slowly, guided by the archivist and a small team of officials. People glanced at him briefly, but no one recognized the quiet authority in his steps. He had lived most of his life invisible, and now the galaxy seemed to be noticing him for the first time. The archivist explained little, only urging him to stay calm. He listened, unsure what was happening, only aware that something ancient had suddenly touched him. They arrived at a transport ship, sleek and polished despite the surrounding chaos. The ship had been sent to take him to the capital world, a place he had only heard of in faint legends. For thousands of years, the throne of humanity had stood empty, left as a symbol of unity and order. Humans had spread to the stars and abandoned the old kingdoms, believing that centralized power was no longer needed. Now that history had returned in him in the most unexpected form. As they traveled, the archivist spoke softly. The throne has not been used in 1,000 years. Humanity thought it unnecessary, even dangerous. You carry what remains of its line. He frowned. The words felt strange, heavy with meaning he could not fully grasp. He had spent years avoiding authority, doing small acts of kindness and surviving day by day. The idea that he might carry a legacy of leadership was almost absurd. The ship landed on a high plateau surrounded by towering spires. The ancient capital world stretched before him, built in styles long forgotten, yet still maintained by careful caretakers. Streets and plazas were empty now, but the silent grandeur spoke of an age when humans had ruled not only their own worlds but influenced the stars. He felt out of place, a simple man among monuments to history. The archivist led him into the central chamber, a vast hall of polished stone and quiet light. At the far end, the throne rested on a raised platform, unoccupied and covered in a soft golden glow. It had not been touched for centuries, but the weight of its history filled the room. The homeless man felt a strange sensation, like the hall recognized him before he recognized it. He stepped closer, hesitating at the threshold. Officials spoke in hushed tones. The line was thought extinct, one said. No one knew what would happen if it returned. The homeless man did not understand the full implications. He looked at the throne not with desire but with curiosity. It seemed to hum faintly, as if waiting for something that had been missing all this time. He remembered small acts from his life, helping children, giving food, repairing broken tools, and wondered if those acts mattered in a universe that now seemed to see him differently. A historian approached, carrying ancient records and data crystals. She laid them out on a smooth table. Every ruler since the throne was first built was expected to serve humanity, not rule it, she said. Power was never the goal. Responsibility was. The homeless man listened, absorbing the words. They resonated with his life of survival and quiet service. He had never wanted power, but perhaps he had already lived by the principles expected of a ruler. He walked slowly around the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Statues of past leaders lined the walls, faces stern but thoughtful. Each one represented not conquest but guidance, not fear but protection. The throne had stood empty for so long because no one could meet its expectations. And yet, the people watching him now seemed to believe he could. He felt no pride, only a strange sense of responsibility, though he did not yet know how to act on it. Outside the chamber, a small garden overlooked a distant city. The man stepped through the glass doors, feeling the sun on his face for the first time in years. Flowers had grown wild, carefully tended by unseen hands, symbolizing both decay and care. He understood, in a simple way, that the throne and the city had survived not because of power, but because someone had maintained them quietly. Humanity's strength, he realized, lay not in domination but in preservation, in the small acts that ensured life continued. The archivist came to stand beside him. You may not want the throne, she said gently, but your presence here matters. People will see you and they will remember what humanity once valued, and what it still can. The man nodded. He did not feel ready to take a title or command armies. He only felt the truth of her words, that legacy was not about grandeur or wealth, but about what one gave even in small ways. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the empty streets, he realized that the throne's emptiness had never been weakness. It had been choice. Humanity had survived for 1,000 years without rulers, guided by principles rather than authority. And now, in this quiet moment, he understood that his life, lived in simplicity and kindness, had already prepared him to stand as a symbol of what humanity could be, without demanding power, without seeking glory. The room grew quiet again and he returned to the chamber. The throne awaited, but he did not sit. He stood before it, calm and steady, a man who had survived, who had cared for others, and who had unknowingly carried the legacy of an empire in his blood. The historians, archivists, and officials watched him, uncertain what he would do next. Yet he only smiled faintly, understanding for the first time that being recognized did not mean he had to change who he was. And in that silence, the throne, long abandoned, seemed less like an object of control and more like a reflection of humanity itself, strong, enduring, and patient, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged again. The homeless man stood in the grand chamber, staring at the throne, its golden light reflecting softly across the polished floor. The officials and historians watched him with careful attention, waiting for him to act. Some expected him to step forward and claim the throne, to embrace a power he had never wanted. But the man remained still, his hands folded loosely in front of him, his eyes calm. A senior archivist approached him carefully. "You carry the royal line," she said gently. "The galaxy will see you as its ruler. The throne is yours. Will you accept it?" The man shook his head slowly. "I have never wanted to rule," he said softly. "I only survive. I only help where I can. Power, it does not interest me." The room fell quiet. Some humans whispered to each other, their voices tinged with disbelief. They had been taught to see rulers as strong, commanding, and ambitious. Yet here stood a man who had no desire for titles, who lived in streets and alleys, yet now carried the legacy of humanity's greatest leadership. His refusal puzzled them. A younger historian stepped forward, curiosity clear in her voice. "Then why do you carry this blood? Why does it matter that you exist?" The man looked at her without anger or pride. "I do not know why my blood has survived. Maybe it is chance. Maybe it is fate. But I know what it means to care for others, to survive without hurting anyone. That is enough. That has always been enough." The senior archivist sighed softly. "Humanity has waited 1,000 years for someone to reclaim the throne. Many thought it would never happen. And now, it has. But perhaps you are right. Maybe the throne was never about power. Maybe it is about responsibility, about guiding rather than ruling." The man walked slowly around the chamber, his footsteps echoing against the high walls. Statues of long-dead rulers looked down, their expressions stern but not unkind. Each represented lives of service, lives of protecting rather than commanding. The homeless man realized that power was never the point. Responsibility, yes, but not command. Care, not fear. And he had already lived by that principle without realizing it. Officials and historians exchanged quiet glances. Some were disappointed. They had hoped for a leader, someone to unify humans under a single banner again. But as they watched the man, they began to understand. Leadership could take many forms. A throne was not a crown, it was a symbol of values. And here was someone who embodied them, not because of ambition but because of life itself. The man stopped before the throne again. He did not reach out to touch it. He did not sit. Instead, he looked out across the chamber, seeing the city beyond the walls, the quiet streets where humans lived simple lives. He thought of the people he had helped, the food he had shared, the small acts of kindness he had given without expectation. That was his throne. That was his legacy. The archivist stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Then you do not wish to rule?" The man shook his head again. "No. I only wish to live and to help. That is what I know. That is what I can give. The throne, it does not need me. Humanity needs people who care, not rulers who command." A silence settled over the chamber, but it was not empty. There was respect in the quiet. The people watching understood that this man, simple and unassuming, carried something greater than authority. He carried humanity itself. The quiet courage to survive, the patience to care, the strength to live without harming others. One historian asked, "If not the throne, then what will you do?" The man smiled faintly, almost shyly. "I will go back to the streets. I will help where I can. I will live as I always have. That is enough. That is all anyone can do." Some officials frowned, worried about how the galaxy would react. Others nodded, understanding that this was the very essence of humanity. Not fear, not power, not conquest, but compassion, patience, and simple courage. They realized that a throne could stand empty and still inspire. It could wait for someone who would carry its meaning, not its power. The homeless man turned to leave, walking slowly toward the glass doors that led to the city. As he passed, he glanced back at the throne one last time. It remained empty, but its presence was stronger than ever. Its history, its meaning, and its ideals were alive in him, even if he would not sit. The galaxy might expect a ruler, but he would give something far more enduring: hope and quiet example. The archivist followed him to the doors. "You understand more than we ever expected," she said softly. The man nodded. "I only understand what I have lived," he replied. The rest is not mine to take." Outside, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the city. People moved about their daily lives, unaware of the discovery inside the chamber. The man walked among them, unnoticed yet extraordinary. He carried the past in his blood and the present in his actions. He did not need a throne to show the galaxy what it meant to be human. And as he disappeared into the streets, the chamber remained silent, yet alive. The throne, empty for 1,000 years, no longer felt abandoned. It had found its meaning again, not through command, but through the quiet strength of someone who refused power yet carried the heart of humanity in every step. The man moved through the city streets slowly, the sun casting a warm glow over the empty plazas and quiet towers. Though the chamber had been full of officials and historians, out here in the open he felt more at home. People worked, walked, and lived their simple lives, unaware of the discovery that had shaken the galaxy. He wondered if the world would ever understand that he did not want power, that he only wanted to help where he could. A transport ship approached quietly, carrying messages from distant colonies. Some humans had heard the news and sent representatives to meet him. They spoke of fleets ready to support him, armies waiting to be commanded, and ambassadors eager to pledge loyalty. The man listened politely, but his expression remained calm. He shook his head. "I am no ruler," he said. "I have never asked for command and I never will. My life is here, among the people, helping quietly, not leading from a throne." The ambassadors looked confused. In their minds, a ruler had always been someone who gave orders and held power. They struggled to understand how someone could be considered the galaxy's greatest hope without wanting authority. Yet they sensed the truth in his words. He did not speak of conquest or wealth, only of care and survival. That, they realized, was leadership in a different form. The man continued his walk, guided by the archivist who had first brought him to the capital. "You could reclaim the throne," she said softly. "You could unite humans again. Many would follow you willingly." He shook his head. "The throne is not mine to take. Humans do not need rulers. They need people who care, people who survive without harming others. That is more than enough." As they reached the old palace gardens, the man paused. Flowers had grown in careful patterns, and trees reached toward the sky as if remembering centuries of care. The palace itself was silent, but it seemed to watch him as though understanding his choice. He realized that the throne had never demanded a ruler. It had waited for someone who would embody its values. That someone did not need to sit or command. That someone could simply live with kindness, patience, and courage. From above, drones hovered silently, recording his movements. Leaders from distant colonies hoped to see a new ruler, someone to guide humanity. Yet the man walked without urgency, without concern for fame or fear. Each step he took, each moment of quiet observation, demonstrated more strength than any army could. Humanity had waited 1,000 years for this, perhaps not for a ruler but for an example. A historian approached him, holding a small device that projected the records of the throne. "You could revive the old council," she said. "You could use your bloodline to influence decisions across the stars." The man looked at her gently. "Influence is not what I want. If humans are to thrive, they must choose their own paths. I cannot rule their choices. I can only help where help is needed." News of his decision spread slowly. Colonies sent ships to observe, curious about the man who carried the royal line but refused power. Some expected chaos, thinking humanity would crumble without a leader. But as they watched him interact with ordinary people, sharing knowledge, offering food, fixing broken tools, they began to understand. Leadership was not about crowns or armies. It was about example. It was about living with honesty, courage, and care. The man returned to a small neighborhood near the city's edge. Children ran toward him, smiling, trusting. He helped them repair a damaged playground, showing patience and care. An elderly couple sought his advice on growing plants in poor soil, and he guided them gently. Every act, however small, demonstrated the quiet power he carried. Observers from distant worlds noted this, and a pattern began to emerge. The strongest humans were not those who ruled with force, but those who acted with thought and compassion. One evening, the archivist and a few representatives returned to the gardens. "You have shown more than we expected," she said. "Perhaps the throne was not meant for one person. Perhaps it was meant to remind humanity of what matters: care, patience, and courage." The man nodded. He did not seek recognition, but he understood her words. The throne's meaning was no longer tied to him personally. It was tied to humanity itself. As the sun set, painting the city in gold and shadow, the man stood quietly in the garden. The palace behind him seemed alive, not with authority, but with the memory of service and protection. Humanity had waited 1,000 years for someone to reflect its values. It had found him, not in command but in simple acts of kindness. From distant colonies, observers recorded and reported the events. They noted that a man with royal blood had chosen a life of service over power. The story spread, not as a tale of conquest or dominion, but as a reminder of humanity's greatest strength: the ability to survive, care, and inspire without seeking reward. The man turned from the palace and walked back into the city. The streets were alive with ordinary life, yet extraordinary in their simplicity. He knew he would never sit on the throne, but the galaxy had already seen the influence of his choices. In small acts, in quiet courage, in care for others, he had returned humanity to itself. And the throne, long abandoned and empty, remained a symbol. It no longer needed a ruler to define it. Its true power lived in the example of one man who refused command, yet showed the galaxy what humanity could be: strong, patient, and kind. The city glowed softly in the early morning light. Streets were quiet, and the air carried the faint scent of flowers and warm stone. The homeless man walked through the plazas as he had done many times before, carrying nothing, yet somehow recognized across the galaxy as someone extraordinary. People passed him, unaware of his bloodline, yet somehow influenced by his presence. His life, simple and unnoticed by most, had begun to ripple outward. News of him had traveled faster than any fleet. Colonies spoke quietly of the man who carried royal DNA yet refused power. Scientists, historians, and diplomats debated what this meant for humanity. Some expected unrest, believing that leadership must come from authority. But everywhere the man had been, the opposite had occurred. Humans had observed him helping the weak, teaching skills, and solving problems without command or expectation. His influence grew quietly, like a seed taking root in fertile soil. Inside the old palace, officials gathered again. The throne remained empty, yet its significance was renewed. "He has returned our history to us without claiming it," a senior archivist said. "He carries the bloodline, yet he does not wield the throne. And somehow, that is enough." Others nodded, realizing that leadership was not about orders but example. The galaxy had learned something new: the greatest human strength was not conquest, but the quiet courage to act rightly without seeking reward. The homeless man moved from the city to nearby villages, helping where he was needed. He repaired machines, shared knowledge, and gave guidance without ever asserting authority. Children followed him, not because he commanded them but because he taught them, listened to them, and cared for them. Adults sought his advice, not out of fear but respect. Everywhere he went, he inspired humanity to look within itself, to understand that greatness did not require a crown. One evening, as the twin suns set over the horizon, the man returned to the palace gardens. The flowers swayed gently in the wind, and the statues of past rulers seemed less imposing in the warm light. He sat on a simple bench, far from the throne, observing the city. His thoughts were quiet. He did not wonder about fame or power. He only considered the people he had helped and the lessons they had shared with him. In this simplicity, he understood the depth of humanity's strength. Representatives from distant worlds arrived to meet him again. "You have changed the galaxy without sitting on the throne," one said. "How have you done this?" The man smiled faintly. "I have only done what I could. I have lived my life as I always have. I have helped where I could. That is enough. People see the truth in small acts. That is more powerful than commands or crowns." The officials and observers began to understand. The throne, long abandoned, was a symbol not of power but of ideals. Its emptiness did not weaken humanity. Instead, it reminded them that the greatest ruler was not always the one who commanded armies, but the one who acted rightly, who cared for others, who survived and helped in the simplest ways. The man had become that symbol without ever sitting on the throne. Across the galaxy, humans reflected on his actions. Colonies that had once been competitive now looked for cooperation. Scientists shared knowledge freely. Communities rebuilt their homes and systems, guided by compassion rather than orders. The story of the man spread quietly, a human with royal blood, unknown to most, who refused authority yet inspired everyone. humanity began to see itself differently. The man continued his quiet life, moving among ordinary people. He did not ask for recognition. He did not demand obedience. And yet, he was remembered and respected by everyone who observed his deeds. His influence was subtle, but it was profound. People began to understand that the measure of a human was not in titles or armies, but in the ability to care, to survive, and to act rightly even when unseen. At the palace, the throne stood alone. It had been empty for 1,000 years and it remained empty now. But it no longer seemed abandoned. Its presence was alive, filled with meaning. It reminded humanity that the truest power was not control but example. And in the homeless man who refused to sit upon it, the galaxy saw the reflection of what humans could be at their best: patient, kind, brave, and responsible. As night fell, the man walked back through the city streets. Lights glimmered in homes and windows, people moving quietly, living their lives. They did not know his name. They did not need to. His actions had already left a mark. Humanity understood itself anew through him. He had returned the throne's meaning not by claiming it but by living it. And so, the throne remained empty, yet stronger than ever. The galaxy no longer measured humanity by who sat upon it, but by the lives they led, the care they offered, and the courage they displayed in everyday moments. The homeless man, with royal blood yet a humble heart, walked quietly among them, a living symbol of hope and of the enduring power of humanity itself. The story would be remembered for generations, not for crowns or wars, but for the man who refused to rule and, in doing so, taught the galaxy the truest meaning of strength, leadership, and the human heart.